Hi, friends. Dr. Wally Taylor, a physician with Forum Health Partners in Austin, Texas, and formerly my practice was known as Texas Integrative Medicine. I want to take a few minutes here this morning to answer some questions that come up a lot about the subject of inflammation. It seems like, especially with this pandemic that we're all dealing with right now, that there's a lot more focus on some of the aspects of inflammation, since it seems to be really important in, especially in people that are having a pretty serious outcome, if not even death, upon infection with the virus. So I wanted to clear up some information or provide some information, fill in some gaps here. I've been focusing on inflammation for many years in my practice of environmental illness. This is chronic, persistent illness that we see in our patient population. Symptoms like arthritis, muscle aches and pains, brain fog, mood symptoms, also a lot of digestive symptoms and problems that often tracks back to the problem of inflammation. Now, inflammation seems to be coming up everywhere these days. Many people understand that their problem is related to inflammation, and yet still there's a lot of misunderstanding about inflammation. But the first thing I want to try to explain to people is that inflammation comes from the immune system. In other words, if we didn't have actions from the immune system, we would not have inflammation. Now, inflammation, it's good news, bad news type of story, because obviously inflammation is important, or our immune systems never would have developed the ability to produce inflammation. Inflammation, of course, is really important in terms of when we get injured, or when we get a splinter, or when we get an infection or a burn. So inflammation is what causes the swelling, the redness, the warmth, the pain, often limits motion. So like when you get a sprained ankle, it becomes swollen and tender, and you can't really move it as much. So it contributes to healing. So clearly inflammation is important for healing. The problem, though, that we're seeing more and more, and by the way, we are experiencing an epidemic of inflammatory diseases. In other words, the diseases that come as a result of persistent inflammatory actions of our immune system is reaching epidemic proportions. And you might say, well, why is that? Well, let me tell you why. The reason that we're seeing an epidemic now of many, many inflammatory diseases, and I'll go into some of those here in a little bit, is the fact that our environment is degrading day by day right in front of us. And you might say, what kind of degradation are you talking about? I'm talking about things like chemicals in the environment, toxic elements like mercury, lead, arsenic, aluminum in the environment. I'm talking about an increasing number of germs, many of them not good germs, so-called pathogens, or I just call them bad bugs, bad microbes in our environment. And this is partly by the fact that these days we live in a global society. We're always moving country to country, state to state, city to city. There's a lot more spread of many of these microbes than there was 20,000 years ago when we lived in our own little clan and didn't really venture out too many miles from where we were born. And we didn't see the kind of interaction that we see today. But basically, we're seeing an epidemic of inflammation-related problems. And you might say, well, give me some examples of that. Well, one good example is just allergy. We're seeing more allergy than ever before. Take, for example, peanut allergy in children. And as I'm sure many of you know, this can be life-threatening. I mean, a kid can die from an anaphylactic reaction to a peanut. Now, years ago when I went to medical school, this was a rare finding or phenomenon. Kids just didn't die from peanut allergies. And you might say, why? Well, it turns out that because of things that they're being exposed to in their environment of the toxic nature, we're seeing many, many more cases of peanuts. I mean, you can't even get peanuts on the airlines anymore. Remember when we used to fly on the budget airlines for a fare for peanuts? You can't even get peanuts. They serve pretzels or cheese nips or goldfish. I'm not sure how much more healthy they are, but at least they're not peanuts. So I can honestly tell you that we're seeing an epidemic of inflammation. And how's that manifested in allergies? Another way that we see inflammation causing persistent disease is what's sometimes termed autoimmunity. Now, I have a problem with the term autoimmunity. Some of you know that the reason I struggle with that name, autoimmunity, is it implies automatic immunity, or some people would even say self-immunity, as though for some reason, one day the immune system just decided to become reactive against the self, the components of our bodies that are our self, our loss of tolerance to self. Well, I think that's misguided. I don't think that's really what happens. I think that the data is showing that what's happening is because of a change in the nature of toxins and even germs in our environment. The body's immune system is often becoming reactive to substances that it deems to be a danger to the body. In other words, it's reacting to a perceived threat, real or imagined. Like, for example, peanuts. I don't think it actually is a real threat to the body, but the immune system doesn't see it that way. So what happens is when the immune system reacts in what we call an immune response, and we'll talk a little bit more about the immune response here in a little bit, it turns out that we get hurt by actions of our own immune system. So I like people to think about that as, I call it immune self-injury. And I make an analogy that it's somewhat like friendly fire in a war. In other words, we're shooting bullets at the bad guys, and sometimes stray bullets end up hitting us, the good guys. Now, one approach to autoimmunity seems to be to turn off the immune system, or at least to turn it way down. Immunosuppression, it's sometimes called. And I honestly feel like that in many cases, suppressing the immune system is probably misguided. Because in my look at the elephant, the way I assess the situation, the immune system's there for a reason. It's trying to protect us against real or perceived threat. And if we turn it down measurably or turn it off, it may take away some of this immune self-injury or friendly fire. But just like in a war with friendly fire, you wouldn't tell the troops, well, to just quit firing. No, you would try to help them redirect their fire. So I feel like a better solution is to try to help the body by eliminating the threat, whatever the perceived or real threat is. If it's a microbe, perhaps by taking steps to lower or remove that microbe or bad bug from the body. But also I think it's to help modify the immune system or modulate the immune system so that it can effectively do what it's trying to do to protect the body, but not end up with a lot of immune self-injury or friendly fire injury in the process. So, one of the things about the immune system is in the last, I'd say since I've been a doctor in the last 30, 40 years, the knowledge that we've gained about the immune system has just increased by many orders of magnitude. So now we know that the immune system has over 200 different cell types in our human immune system, that it has a standing form of immunity, which is already existing and ready to go. Sometimes we call this the innate immune system. And then we have a very extensive form of what we call acquired immune system, which means that it develops in response to real or perceived threat. So we know now that there's two main types of acquired immunity. There's what we call humoral or circulating immunity, and there's immunity that we call cell-mediated or cell-based immunity. We're learning more and more about the different signaling molecules, or the ways that the immune system talks to the different cell types using many different proteins. We're learning a lot about the effectors of the immune system. These are like the bullets that the immune system uses to fight back. But we're talking here about sometimes they might be protein or peptide molecules, but many times there are other molecules that are not peptides or proteins. What I mean by that is they're not made up of a sequence of amino acids, but they may be other small molecules. For example, histamine is a small molecule that is an effector molecule of the immune system. Turns out to account for a lot of this immune self-injury that I'm talking about. For example, if a child dies of eating a peanut, I can guarantee you that high levels of histamine and other immune effectors are playing a big role. A lot of people don't know this, but histamine is extremely toxic to many bad bugs, like, for example, microbes and even parasites, but it's equally toxic to human cells. A very small injection of histamine would be deadly to a person. So you might say, why does the body make histamine if it's so deadly to us? Well, it actually serves a purpose, but the body actually is very careful about how it normally releases histamine, only where it's needed, close to where the bad bugs are or where the perceived threat is. And then we have many, many mechanisms, natural antihistamine systems in our own bodies to try to disable the histamine. But sometimes when those systems to disable histamine don't work, the histamine gets out of hand. We can have a lot more allergy symptoms that way, which is one reason, for example, that we take over-the-counter antihistamines as a way to try to fight back against that. But anyway, we know so much more now about the immune system, about the different cell types, and about the different signaling molecules, what triggers the immune system to turn on. And we're beginning to understand more and more about how do we naturally turn the immune system off. But that seems to be what a lot of the problem is that it's getting triggered on, but we're unable to trigger it off. So I know that many of you are saying, okay, fine, we understand inflammation is a problem. It's being seen more and more these days because of changes in the environment. Can it be controlled? Well, I want to say that absolutely, in my experience, working with patients with chronic inflammation, it can be controlled. And what I want to tell you now is just a few things that we've learned about how we control it. Well, one thing that we do know is that one of the main triggers of inflammation in the body is the status of the autonomic nervous system. I like to call it the stress response center or the threat response center in the brain. Some people would call it the sympathetic center of fight or flight. We've had it for eons, and it's there to protect us from danger and life-threatening situations. But in today's world, because of a changing nature of the threats in our environment, they're more long-lasting, they're more permanent, they're more ever-present. We're tending to stay more and more stuck in this place of fight or flight. And when that happens, the body changes in a material way. We see changes in brain chemicals such as adrenaline or epinephrine, norepinephrine. We see changes in hormones such as the adrenal hormone cortisol, which is one of our stress hormones. But also the brain is able to control our body in other ways as well. I know that many of you have heard me talk about the way that the stress brain actually controls the function of our mitochondria, the little guys in our cells that make energy to power all of our other needs of energy for the purpose of daily living. Immune function, detox function, muscle function, brain function, digestive function. And actually the stress brain is able to dial down the mitochondria in a mechanism that's known as the mitochondrial cell danger response, which has been very well articulated by Dr. Robert Navio. And some of you have seen me talk about him in the past. In addition, the threat brain is able to induce in our bodies a setting of hyper-alertness or hypervigilance. And this not only affects all of our senses, like our smell, our vision, our hearing, our taste, our touch, but it also involves the immune system. Our immune system becomes hypervigilant. It's on pins and needles. It's on eggshells. It's on a hair trigger. So it turns out that one of the big ways that we've learned that we can help control inflammation, unwanted, uncontrollable inflammation that's resulting in so much friendly fire or immune self-injury, is that we can help teach the brain to migrate or reset from the setting of fight or flight to the other setting of the threat brain, which is sometimes called the parasympathetic system setting, or I like to call it the place of calm and tranquility in the brain. Sometimes they even call it the grazing in the grass place of the brain. Everything's cool. It turns out that when we're in that part of our brain, or if our subconscious threat response brain is in that setting, the immune system and all of our senses are materially calmer. I know many of you have probably read and learned a lot about a new term that we're tossing around called the mast cell activation syndrome or mast cell activation disorder. And I want to just make a little side note about that. The mast cell is a very important cell, part of our immune system. It's one of the over 200 cells that makes up the immune system. But the mast cells don't really circulate in the bloodstream. They occur in certain areas of the body, in tissues such as the stomach lining or the lips or the mouth or the brain or the heart or the muscles, the skin. And actually they're full of effector molecules like histamine, these bullets, if you will, that the immune system uses. And just like the rest of the immune system, when there's toxic threat or stress, and the threat brain is triggered to be in the fight or flight setting, these mast cells, along with the rest of the immune system, become extremely hyper alert. They're on a hair trigger, and they're very easily activated by all sorts of real and perceived threats to the body. And when the mast cells become activated, what they are designed to do or programmed to do is rather immediately, oftentimes in a fraction of a second, they release the contained mediators of inflammation like histamine and others like prostaglandins and leukotrienes. There's, according to one researcher, Dr. Afrin, recently told us at a conference I attended that there's almost 1,000 different toxic mediators, effectors within these mast cells. We used to say it was probably about 100. Now they've learned that there's maybe 10 times more than that. But anyway, these mast cells become stimulated to release these effectors that they have within them. And this oftentimes leads to many of the symptoms of immune self-injury that I'm referring to, or friendly fire. So there's literally volumes now that's been written about ways that we can stabilize or calm the mast cells. I mean, there's herbs like quercetin, and there's other drugs that have come around to try to help stabilize the mast cells. Let me say at this juncture, it just kind of really dawned on me that I wanted to say that what the information that I'm providing for you now is for informational purposes only. I'm really not setting out here to treat any disease. I'm not trying to give anybody any specific medical advice with the information I'm sharing with you today. And I would urge you that if you feel like any of the issues that we're talking about today would apply to you, I urge you to seek out the professional advice of your own personal healthcare provider. Now, I am a practitioner working for Forum Health Partners, and I certainly am available to work with you. If you have questions, you can certainly contact Forum Health and arrange to talk to me. And Forum Health has many other brilliant healthcare providers within the ranks that are also available to interact with you to help drill down on your personal issues of the way inflammation or other problems may be affecting your health and well-being. So having said that, the mast cells really is something that we've really latched in on. And to me, it's just one subset of this bigger concept of inflammation that's related to an immune system that is lacking modulation. It's basically reacting in sometimes in inappropriate ways, and it's accounting for many of the signs and symptoms. So we can deal with stress, and that has been shown to be very valuable to improve the function of the immune system, not only to reduce inflammation, but actually also materially improves the capabilities of our immune system to do what it's supposed to do, to protect us from foreign invaders, whether they be germs or bad bugs, viruses, bacteria, parasites, yeast, funguses, and molds, or even chemicals. So what else can I say to you to help you understand how this problem of persistent inflammation or persistent immune self-injury, friendly fire, can be controlled? Well, it does appear very clearly now that it's these toxins in the environment that play a major triggering role as root cause. So to me, it only seems obvious that if we can remove the toxins from the body, that we're going to be able to significantly alter the course of inflammation. And one of the things I get on my high horse or my soapbox all the time, and that's to really proclaim that that humans need to pay attention to the degradation of the environment, which the statistics all show that it's getting worse and worse by the day. And as a result, we're seeing higher and higher levels of these diseases of chronic inflammation, even in involving children at younger and younger ages. So clearly we need to try to clean up our environment. I always tell my patients that I honestly can tell them that I believe that if they had never had any exposure to any environmental toxins or any toxic life experiences or stresses, that they wouldn't be sitting in front of me complaining of symptoms of inflammation and chronic illness. So we've got to reduce exposure clearly, and I think that means that we need to clean up our environment starting yesterday. The other thing, of course, we need to do is we need to help the body eliminate toxins, get those toxins out. And, in the case of some toxins, like, for example, toxic electromagnetic frequency that might be man-made, say from a Wi-Fi tower or from a high voltage power line or even from an iPad or iPhone, oftentimes that just means distancing yourself or eliminating exposure. But for many cases, it's toxins that can be removed from the body. So I'm actually going to talk for just a second about the role of some of these bad bugs, because you know that even a lot of the focus now on this pandemic, that's a perfect example of a bad bug, in this case a virus, that is playing a role in triggering an inflammatory response of the body. And in this particular case, oftentimes that inflammatory response of the body is what is proving to be so detrimental, even it sometimes can be life-threatening. So you might say, okay, well, how is it that bad bugs do harm the body? One of the ways we do know is that some bad bugs actually make poisons or toxins. We see this a lot with certain molds that give off what we call mold toxins. Mycotoxins, they're also sometimes known. Examples might be ochratoxin or gliotoxin or trichothecene toxin, mycophenolic acid, citrinin. There's about 30 or more that have been described from certain species of indoor molds. So clearly this is one way that the presence of bad germs in our bodies can generate disease and inflammation. Also though, in addition to toxins that they might give off, another example might be botulism, the toxin from botulism, or tetanus, the toxin from tetanus, or even cholera. Cholera gives off what we call a cholera toxin. But in addition to these poisons that certain germs can give off, We also know that a big way that the presence of bad bugs in our body triggers persistent disease and inflammation is because the immune system, God, thank God for it, perceives that they're there, and it responds in the way that it is capable of doing, what we call an immune response. And that immune response includes what we call inflammation. And so it's actually the triggering of the immune system, at times appropriately, but at times inappropriately. And sometimes it's due to the fact that toxins have caused a certain degree of loss of modulation of the immune system. In other words, it doesn't behave exactly as it's supposed to do or pre-programmed to do, or would have acted 1,000 years ago before all these toxins were present. That instead the immune system, because of the presence of certain of these microbes, can cause this friendly fire or self-injury. So I do believe that if we can lower microbes, let's just say that you have a virus, and let's just say you have 100 quadrillion copies of that virus in your body. That's, of course, a very big number with lots of zeros behind it. But what if you could take that number, 100 quadrillion, and lower it by thousands and thousands of folds down to trillions, and then billions, and finally millions, and then maybe even eventually thousands? Even if you couldn't make it go to zero, I contend that when there's fewer numbers of viral particles in your body, they're going to give off less toxins, number one, and they're going to trigger less immune response. The immune system might still see them, but it may not tend to respond as aggressively or as vigorously because it doesn't see as much of a perceived threat. So that's one good way that we can help the body out when there are threats like microbes, is we can try to lower the counts of those microbes. Even if in some cases we may not be able to make those microbes absolutely go to zero in the body, there may still be some present, but if we can lower the numbers enough, it's still enough to get over the disease. So I think that there's many different ways that we can try to lower counts of germs. Man-made antibiotics like penicillin and doxycycline, that's just one example, but there's many other ways. There's a lot of good plant-based medicines that can play a role as antimicrobials. Oxygen appears to be able to play a big role. Many germs are killed in the presence of excess oxygen in the body, what we call anaerobic bad bugs or germs. Certain wavelengths of light appear to be very harmful to bugs, like, for example, ultraviolet light. But there again, ultraviolet light can also be toxic to our cells, so we have to be cautious there. Ozone is another very valuable modality that appears to play a role in lowering the counts of certain bad bugs in the body. So clearly, lowering microbes various ways can often be very valuable, even if we can't completely eliminate them. And so often in my practice, I always tell people that inflammation is so often not just caused by one thing. Some people might say, well, I have inflammation because I have Lyme disease. Of course, Lyme disease is caused by a single bacteria that we know of, Borrelia burgdorferi, which is a species of spirochete, a syphilis-like germ. But it's oftentimes a combination in the body that's triggering inflammation and immune self-injury. You might have germs, you might have a virus, you might have a bacteria, you might have a yeast, you might have a parasite, or several of each. We know there's 4,000 bad bugs that have been identified so far that can cause illness in humans. I guess the COVID-19 virus makes it 4,001. So we are developing new ones, of course, in the course of our day-to-day events. But also the mold toxins and the chemical toxins and the toxic heavy metals, and even the physical toxins like the electromagnetic frequency from Wi-Fi, and even the new one that people are concerned about called 5G. Well, anyway, I'm going to wrap things up here. Enough said today about inflammation. It's certainly a big topic in my practice, and I think it's a huge, big topic for many people in the world today that are suffering from persistent symptoms and signs of illness that's related to the self-injury effects of the immune system, what we call inflammation, autoimmunity, allergy, just chronic inflammation. So if you have any questions, I'd appreciate comments. I'd appreciate it if you could, if you want to hear more about this, let me know. Be happy to make other videos in the future to try to add additional information about what my experience is in helping people that seem to be struggling with persistent inflammation. And feel free to like my YouTube channel. We'll post this to Facebook. You can please follow us on Facebook. And if you want to learn more, you can go to the forumhealth.com website. They've got plenty of information. And like I say, we are available if you want individual information. I am a licensed physician, a medical provider here in the state of Texas. So hope this has been helpful. And I hope all of y'all are staying safe from the pandemic that we're facing, socially distancing, doing what you can to lower the curve so that we don't overburden our emergency and intensive health services, which, by the way, it looks like we're doing a pretty good job of that overall. Thank God. Way to go, everyone. And I know we'll get through and survive this pandemic. It's terrible to see loss of life and chronic injury, but we will get through this. But it's obviously a part of this bigger issue of environmental toxins and the way inflammation plays into our state of wellness. Great. God bless everyone.